Oh wow, look at this.
Oh, yeah.
This is a group. Wow. Wow.
Thank you so much. Heather, it is such a treat that you're doing this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chief book lover of Indigo.
This is awesome.
Yeah, as we were saying, this is one of the most beautiful rooms in Toronto. It's
gorgeous.
a treat.
So thank you for inviting me to do this with you, Joe.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you.
Congratulations for the book.
Thanks.
So, I'll just share with the audience that I saw this book when it was literally an idea and a couple of pages and a very bright pink cover. Totally pink, everywhere pink, and a few pages. And Joe stopped by my office to just, ask my thoughts as a bookseller. And I said, well, Joe, I don't know about the all pink. But then I see it like this and I say, wow, I think I was wrong. The more of this pink, the better, Joe. So it's good.
I remember that conversation
Remember?
well.
I remember it too.
You said, first, write the book, because I wasn't sure. So that encouragement meant a lot. And secondly, use pink. Maybe not so much.
Honestly, it's
so here we are.
So congratulations on getting it done, really.
Thank you.
It's a huge achievement, and it turns out you had a lot to say. So we're going to try and unpack a little bit of it tonight.
Wonderful.
Something I've never asked you, and I'm really curious about. How did you get into this gig to begin with?
The whole world of reinventing companies?
The introduction into retail and then ending up in that marketing, that interface between customer and what the business is trying to do. Sort of how did that all start for you?
So it started, and I'll share with you, this is a watch that my dad was given on his 25th anniversary back in the day when there was such a company called Simpson Sears. And he was 44 years with that business. And on Saturday mornings, instead of going to the ballpark, as most kids my age were doing with their fathers, we were off to the stores. And we would walk these retail stores, not only Simpson Sears stores in the day, but certainly many others. And we'd look at displays and we'd talk product and marketing and so on. And of course, I'm dressed up in a suit and a tie because that's what you did walking retail stores. And all of those memories that I absorbed, I didn't realize how much they impacted me. Mm-hmm. And I gravitated, once I was through design school, to retail.
But you went to design school.
I did, yes.
And did I read somewhere that at one point you thought you might be a musician as opposed to...
I was tempted. But here's the wonderful thing about learning anything is understanding what it takes to be great and then realizing that others are actually great and you're not. And that's the conclusion I came to with music.
Great enough.
I still play guitar and I occasionally sing, but no, that's not right. I'm happy I chose the career I did.
You gave me the perfect segue because so much about this seems to be about either you're doing something that you're really great at and nobody can do, or you're in need of reinvention, right? Is that pretty much okay? So you were your first reinvention. I think that's quite wonderful. Okay.
I like to. I hadn't quite thought of it that way.
I'm just trying to weave this little thread here. Okay, I think it would be very interesting to have you share with me and everybody in the room the single best overall process that you have led and been involved with that resulted in a retail reinvention. And we'll talk a little bit about how that relationship happens between you and the CEO and the company. Mm-hmm. But pick the one that you think is the most compelling to you in terms of the overall process.
It would be hard to pick because so many are exciting to me for different reasons. But the one that I learned really the foundation of how to reinvent businesses with leadership teams was this defining experience I had with Duane Reade. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, Duane Reade is a regional drugstore chain in New York City, and at the time it was owned by a private equity firm. And a good friend, a person you and I both know well, John Leder, had retired from a Loblaw, and he called me one day and said, look, I don't know if I would normally come off the bench to reinvent, a $2 billion roughly retail business, but it's New York City, and it's going to be really fun. And would you come in and do that with me? And the reason I pulled that one out, and it is actually the last story in the book, was everything that I came to understand that was important in changing a business into its more powerful version really coalesced for me in that experience. And those principles that I write about actually were penned for the first time in New York City as I was doing that.
What are those principles? Let's just get those principles out because I want to talk about each one of those.
So there's 5 of them, and principle sounds like such a big word. It sounds like tablets from on high that are being handed down. But the way I think about them are just simple ways of thinking and behaving when you're faced with tremendous change. And they are very, very simple. In fact, they were long paragraphs. You know me well enough. It's hard for me to give short answers, and it's hard for me to write short paragraphs. But we eventually distilled them down, me and some of my colleagues, to 2 or 3 words. And the first one is seek insight everywhere. It just means open up the aperture beyond the world that you're focused on so that you can understand what's happening in the world and be inspired by things beyond your business, beyond your category, and pay attention to what's happening with humans and how they're interacting in various ways. That's the first one. The second is embrace uncertainty. And what I've learned in any kind of change is fear is a companion to people facing change. And it causes us to stop and think that maybe here is the safest place. Maybe I shouldn't venture because that's where the unknown is. And the more that you can warm up and say, maybe safety isn't where I'm standing. Maybe it actually is in the future, and have the courage to move forward. The third is create the future now. And that's simply, it's a lesson from the tech industry, really. The faster you can get things out of your head and out of the lab and into the field and in action and learning from them, a couple of things happen. You indeed do learn from them, but you also put things in motion. And that motion is really fundamental to moving forward. The future isn't some far-off place. It isn't some, distant possibility. It arrives daily. And so the more you are actually putting things in action, the more you're shaping, hands-on, your own future. The fourth is to make momentum together. Right. And that's really about working as a team to create a momentum first in belief of where you're going. You craft a strategy together, and then, rolling up sleeves together and making it happen. Actually, that's the last one. And the one before that is simply bringing a sense of focus on the outcome into play early. And painting a picture of what that outcome is, and then moving towards it, and making sure everyone is clear and it's very tangible in their mind. So that's the 5 principles.
Right. So basically, you got to know what's out there.
Yes.
And I'm guessing a big part of that is then who that customer is and what they value that you're trying to serve. Right? Do you focus a lot on that?
100%.
Yeah.
And in fact, that idea of seek insight everywhere is really fundamentally focused on customers and what you know about them.
Right.
And there's lots of books written, a lot of study around why do people buy, why do they behave in the ways they do. They often are buying a pair of shoes, but the motivation might not be to look good. It might actually be confidence. Right. I may not be good at crafting, but what I may be pursuing in the interest of buying craft materials and so on is actually the ability to create and share something of myself with maybe generations.
Right, so just pushing at that unarticulated something that they're around.
Yeah, and getting deeper on real human motivations.
So whether those were articulated as well or not when you started with John on the Duane Reade, but they emerged along the way. Did John have he must have had some vision of where he wanted to take it, or he wouldn't have accepted the responsibility. So when he called you, did he already have some idea, or just a gut sense that if he put a couple of smart people together, you could figure out something that would add value? Like, was there something he saw?
He thought that it would be almost impossible not to figure out the next act for that drugstore chain.
Because they had locations that he thought were valuable.
100%. All the things that would be so vital in retail: location, density of presence, density of population. New York is a fascinating place, as you know. The population doubles during the day, simply all those people coming onto the island of Manhattan. And the starting point was so low, there was 10 things we could do to make it better and producing better outcomes or better performance.
Were the stores the right size? Did he think they were big enough to do something with so that it becomes a merchandising question and an excitement question and an engagement question? So if he said, I've got enough locations, we've got insane density, they're run pretty poorly, I remember those stores, not very exciting.
Yes.
Was that basically, he said, look, good locations, big enough stores, pathetic experience? Was that basically?
Yeah, I would say very, very weak experience. DwayneReedSucks.com was a very popular website at the time.
Sounds pathetic to me.
And and just a general lack of inspiration.
Right.
But the interesting thing about Duane Reade was, we're used to in scale retail, this is the box, this is the configuration, and depending on what the real estate opportunity is, it's going to be plus or minus that. Duane Reade was the craziest collection of real estate. They had figured out what I think a lot of retailers just now are figuring out, which is, how do you tuck a proposition into a configuration that is 2,000 square feet on one level to 14,000 square feet on three levels? I remember standing in a Duane Reade store, and I said, I haven't come across some of the sort of essentials in personal care. Where are those? And they said, well, if you go down that corridor, which actually turned out to be a corridor heading under the street, there was feminine hygiene. And I said, how would customers know? And they said, look, this is New York. It's a tough city. They'll dig it out of the back room. So, the dynamics of New York actually created possibilities that we took advantage of.
Right. So you had all those things. So at the end of the day, would you say that reinvention was mostly about imagining a much greater customer experience in layout, planogramming, merchandising, assortment?
Yes.
Was that in the end what that one was about?
Based on two insights, just to bring it back to that first principle.
Right.
The first insight was, Duane Reade was ubiquitous and really part of the fabric of life in New York City and might be brand-like. It really wasn't a brand, but New York was a brand. And we understood that there was an emotional relationship between the citizens of New York and all those who visit. And we saw a real opportunity to become much more essential and New York in the way we brought our experience to life and the proposition itself. The second insight was, as you know, you've spent a lot of time in New York, it's not an easy city, and it's actually getting harder. What customers said was, if only you could be a partner in making this place easier for us. And that set us on a journey not only to become more New York, uniquely New York since 1960, was one of the first messages we brought forward, but to start to tailor to micro neighborhoods, even to a greater extent, what they really cared about. And no Duane Reade was alike. It was fantastic to see how the variation place to place across streets from one another. The more that we could dial into what New Yorkers saw as easy, the more the business exploded in terms of performance.
So I ask, it's interesting that you picked that story because that feels to me like a very different kind of, I call that a reimagining than a reinvention. That's how it feels to me. Maybe let's talk a little bit about Staples. Maybe Staples will end up being closer to a reinvention to the extent that the reason that Staples is going through what it's going through is that it is fundamentally challenged by Amazon going into the office business, and that will do something.
Yes.
And there isn't a lot of reason. I mean, it's hard to have an emotional connection to your file folders.
Right.
So, I mean, if you could
As nicely designed as
right.
we'd like them to be.
Imagine that looking forward, you can go to Amazon Office and get anything with their Prime, and they'll deliver it by drone. And like, if you just move forward, I can appreciate why it's a well-known brand. It's powerful in that I'm curious whether you see the demand that John has taken on with Staples as a need for an even bigger transformation, because so much has happened. Like, since you went to do the Dwayne Reed,
Completely, yeah.
the amount of change is just exponential. So could you talk a little bit about that? And do you see it as a more demanding reinvention?
I would say, for the reason you outlined, yes. The world a decade and a little more ago was completely different. A simpler time, even though it was in the heart of a recession. And we did do some bold things, like bring food in a more significant way.
Dean and DeLuca, right?
Yeah, in fact, they were the first,
I remember that.
the supplier of sandwiches and such.
You dropped in there.
Great. And the evolution in beauty, which was unusual to small format, convenient retail. But I think your point is right, which in an era now when customers can get pretty much whatever they want, whenever they want, and in the case of Staples, arguably for less, what is the reason that the business exists? It's a storehouse of stuff, most of it unsexy, and customers say, look, I don't really need to go there anymore. The interesting insight in that case, which gave us infinite possibility to reimagine the business and to do bold things, was what has also changed besides availability and proliferation of retail and channels and so on, is the degree to which customers are entrepreneurs themselves. So back in my dad's generation, there might be a small percentage of the population that are actually entrepreneurs. Today, north of 50% of Canadians, if not their main gig is an entrepreneurial venture, they all have side gigs. And what we found was that they are alone on that journey. The banks aren't partners, the technology firms aren't partners, telcos are not seen as partners. What they were looking for were two things. One, help me on the journey to work and learn and continue to grow. Not just grow my business and my fortunes, but grow in my skills and my knowledge and my competency. Where is the partner to help me do that? Well, the school system would be really the standout. Once you get past that, it's working for other businesses and learning from them. And a lot of people were choosing the opposite. So in the end, could we be a partner to them? And secondly, were we helping them pull together solutions and inspiring them? And pulling together solutions meant pulling them together themselves as a community. Right. And that led us to do some pretty crazy things with the store, if you've visited University Avenue.
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
so you took out a ton of product, you created space, and how's it going?
Amazing. So imagine you've grown up leading an incredibly successful retailer, one that I admire to this day. And you know what it means, the correlation between linear footage of product and selling space and the performance of stores and selling. The idea that a community strategy, that it was oriented towards people on this journey and helping them with solutions and connecting them to one another, caused us to look at the store and say, really, we don't need to house goods. Some, yes, maybe brought to life in a different way. What we really needed to do was to create an environment where people could connect with one another, connect with ideas, actually work in this space. So we took fully a third of the selling space of that store, and we gave it over to that community strategy, a place that you could rent a desk, Staples Studio as it's branded, a place where you could come and learn from people speaking.
And do you charge the customer to rent the desk?
Charge to rent the desk, but not to hear the speaker. And you could hear the deep intake of breath when the merchants heard that we were going to take one of the top quartile stores and do that. But that insight was so clear, and the strategy was completely aligned at leadership, and we said, what is the downside of trying this? Let's go for it. A crazy thing happened. Sales went up 35%.
Wow.
And they went up on the base like 35 points in a world where flat is the new up. Here we are saying it's not +2, +5, but it's up in really significant ways. Why?
And you think that's maybe not at 35, but could you see even 20% sustainable or 15%
100%. And in fact, we've taken it now to other places. The leadership team has, and found that it's these things, as you know, are always experimental, and things get refined and so on. But as it's rolling out, that double-digit lift on the basis of I come for different reasons. I engage differently when I'm there. I learn things. I connect dots that perhaps the only way I would connect them is if I saw somebody else doing those things, and I actually work there in some cases. And now it is literally a community of entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, by the way, I think of, for example, teachers as the unsung heroes of the entrepreneurial world.
They might come and connect.
It's amazing what they do.
And could you, there's all this, all this space that's being rented for temporary office and et cetera. Could you imagine that actually becoming a real money-making business for Staples?
100%, completely.
Great, yeah.
And part of it is that when I have a different relationship with a brand, and I'm connecting and engaging in different ways, my orientation is not around an item and a price and a comparative. It's around a feeling of partnership. I have an ally. And that was very explicit in the strategic work we did. We said, this is what we want to become. We want to become, or go from the office supplies superstore, which is what it was for all those years since Stemberg created it, to the working and learning company. And that journey
is a very interesting repositioning.
And it's just begun. They're at a very...
And has the online sales in that region, in that trade area, have they gone up as well?
Yes.
So they have. So you get a double benefit from it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. If there's one thing, I get an opportunity to meet with lots of CEOs and leadership teams and boards. And, it'll always come invariably to the question, is there a silver bullet in all this as we think about the evolution of consumerism and retail? And I say, I can only think of one thing, and that would be stop selling stuff, and you will prosper. Stop selling products, stop selling services. Of course, that's how you'll monetize, but sell something that people care about more. And if you don't know what that is, go find that.
What makes a CEO a good client for you?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. We've done work together a little bit. And here's what I admire, and you are included in this, not because we're on a stage in front of a lot of people that I happen to know, including my family. I admire curious people, the people that don't get stuck in today. And they say, of course, this might be the way it's been. This might be how we make money. But what is the next act? Where's the world going? What are the pings, the future tells that I'm seeing? And how might we pursue and turn those into something? Even if we don't bet the farm on it, let's just be in that engaged, moving forward in the future. You're one of those, John Lutter, we've talked about, Glenn Murphy. I admire people that are in a constant state of transformation themselves in the way they think about their businesses. And that's different than, good, competent leaders of steady state businesses that really are very good at dials, not levers, and just incremental change.
I suspect you believe, I certainly do, that it's going to be a required characteristic because of how much change is happening. It will be a required characteristic. How much change, how competitive, and as you say, the selling of stuff in and of itself will increasingly be a limited competitive advantage.
Yes.
Right? If you make your own proprietary, great, but if it's not really proprietary with a sustainable...
Yes.
That's why I think Zara is so interesting, because of they not only make their stuff, but their supply chain is so incredible. Do you admire that company?
Completely, because they've created that complete ecosystem of creation and production and sourcing and this currency at which they can go. But here's the heck of it, though. We need to be good at change, and most leaders are not. That we've been trained to perfect things, and almost like a car engine, the inputs and the outputs, and get them running, and then hold it there. We haven't been trained to advance the thinking on a regular basis. Well, the world has forced us now to go there, and we not only need to be like good at it or great at it, we need to be like pro athlete good at making change.
So, given that statement, here's a little commercial. It's the halfway part, so it's time for a commercial, it's the halfway part. But when you say that, it's coincidental to me that I just finished reading a book called In Love with the World by a monk whose name is Rinpoche, quite renowned world monk. And he makes that point that life is in constant flow.
I love that concept.
It's continually changing, and human beings want it to be stopped. And one of the examples he gave that I found so powerful, so I share it back with you, he said, nobody would get on a train and expect it to come to a station and stop forever. You get on a train, you get to a train stop, it stops.
It's going
and then it goes on. It stops and then it goes on. And he said it was one of his most powerful insights in life.
I completely relate to that whole concept of flow, and I think it's becoming more understood. I think it's resonating with people more and more today, simply because change is on us as never before. But I love what's implied in that, and I will read that book.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Is the peacefulness that's suggested in that. That this isn't something that's being done to us. This isn't something that we need to be frightened of or think that we need to hunker down. Let's embrace it. Let's embrace uncertainty. Let's go forward and imagine possibilities. And just by putting them in motion, we're in command of our world. We're in that flow. Right. And I think that's, classic business training really isn't about that. It's about analysis, and it's heavy on fact and rationality. And you can't create the future on facts. You can't predict the future, as you know. You have to imagine it, and that takes a different spirit.
Right, by seeing some patterns and knowing. So that's totally wonderful. Worst situation you were in? I mean, were you in one where you were expected to help find a reinvention, and somehow you just couldn't excavate one?
Well, thank you for asking that, the toughest of all questions. When I was working with the editorial team at the publisher, Page 2, who some of the folks are here today, they said, you really should write about the ones that didn't work, because I'm sure there's lessons there. The trouble with writing the failed instances is you risk throwing people under the bus. And so I took great care, and yet I did write 2 stories in the book, The Vitamin Shop and David's Bridal. For different reasons, they weren't successful. But it wasn't that there weren't insights that we found that really changed the way we thought about the business and its potential. Or we didn't craft really clear strategy that was actionable, and it didn't take us to a place where we could imagine this incredible new value proposition and experience. All those things were true in both those cases. What happened was very human. That we humans, myself included, got in the way of putting change in motion and having the courage to stay with it. And it fell apart. And in one instance...
Is the Vitamin Shop not a Canadian company, is it?
No, it's American, based in New Jersey. Okay. And, like many retailers, great successful ride, specialty store, a bit of a category killer in that space, and then just ran out of gas and ran out of relevance. And then, of course, everyone is selling their categories now, drugstores, mass, now online. And why do I go to those dusty old stores anymore? But we had it in one brief moment, and I tell that story in the book. The leadership team, the board saw it. They said, as boards do, we need more evidence. And we said, we'll bring you that evidence. Here's some early indicators, but shortly afterwards, we brought evidence and said, this strategy is working. It's connecting with customers in a different way. But everything from that point forward was a slow walk. Maybe we need more proof. Maybe we should wait to see how the market. And it was really, we did it to ourselves in the end. And the opportunity, these things don't last forever. The window's open and the doors open, and you either go through them or they close, and the doors and windows close.
So would you say, in addition to clients who are curious or who are ready, you also need a client with the conviction and the courage of their convictions, of his or her convictions, to actually move?
Yes. Right. And you can adopt a philosophy of proven move, as long as you do it at a pace. Right. If there's anything that I'm obsessed about, and I do talk about at length in the book, is this concept of momentum. And if you remember back to grade 10 science class, it would be, Newton's law, like it's mass, the critical mass of things we can put in motion towards some new outcome, times velocity, the speed with which we can make them move, and that equals momentum. Well, you've run a business, and the difference between running one that has momentum and running one that doesn't is night and day. And the reason is that momentum creates this energy inside businesses as well as around them. You notice them, you pay attention, you tend to be curious, you get excited about the change as it comes, and you become, in all of that, unstoppable. You go faster than your competitors. You crash through barriers in your way. And so I'm obsessed with this idea of how do you create momentum? Well, it turns out you create momentum with humans by collaborating and doing things together.
Did you ever think of applying the reinvention concept, the reinvention principles, and the reinvention philosophy to anything outside of retail or outside of a consumer-serving business?
Yes, we've done
maybe American politics?
Yeah. Boy, strap seatbelts on for that one.
No, but really, any
what I learned, it's interesting, we've talked, mentioned John along the way.
He's so impressive.
He's an impressive guy, and I love him. He's an amazing leader and friend. And he left Duane Reade. It was successfully sold to Walgreens. I was fortunate enough to get tapped to go with my team and help Walgreens on their transformational journey. But John went to U.S. Food Service at the time, food service, B2B company, and we applied the same principles. In fact, I tried to talk him out of hiring me. I said, John, I've really only done this in the retail world. We've grown up together in retail. And he said, just get over it and get down to Chicago and let's apply what we know how to do as a method. And so we did that, and it was successful and led to a great IPO and such. We've now done it in far-flung worlds, retirement living, not that long ago. It's the same disciplines. Who are you focused on as customers? What do they care about deeply? And then who are you to them as a brand? How do you build that brand, not just as an idea or an ad campaign, but as an ethos, as a way of behaving? And then lastly, the business part, what's your competitive advantage? I'm fascinated by companies that talk about differentiation. Oh, we need to, differentiate ourselves. Well, if you sort of break the word down to the essence of it, it means be different. And most companies today are not different from their competitors. Last time I looked, interchangeability is not a successful strategy.
I think your unit of one, or your
category of
one, right,
yes,
is a very powerful idea.
May I, with your permission, ask you a question? Because we have, lived and operated in similar worlds of retail, and you lead a business. What I've always admired, I said earlier, that you've continued to evolve the business. If I think about the bookstore that you began with some things around it that created a wonderful experience, now it's really where do books end and so much else around lifestyle. And I remember your original idea of cultural department store, and it still rings in my ears. How have you experienced change? And it's not easy, but you continue to advance your business and experiment and grow in fresh new ways.
We have no choice but to continue to experiment. What is the current challenge to our business? Our core, what we started with, so now I can reverse this and you can say our core, what we started with, books. Actually, we're a media company, right? Traditional media, books, music, DVD, video, newspapers. As content went digital, we peeled off some elements. We then got involved in digital reading, as you know. But physical books remain an important part of our business. And interestingly, consumers, notwithstanding what we think, are still reading the majority of what they read. If you take the total, the majority is still being read physical. So digital books and audiobooks take a chunk, but it's still a lot
the
of physical books, right? So the problem is not physical, it's less, but we've managed to grow that part, so that's not a problem. Here's the problem. Since 1997, books have been available online. Amazon introduced books as their loss leader category at 30 to 40% off, which is you make no money.
Right. Yeah.
We have always met them online, but there's just this tipping point where more and more people are saying, well, I should always have the online price everywhere, and you can't run a physical store and provide them. So at what point do we have to say we can't keep 60,000 titles in a store because consumers will not pay enough for that experience? And that's so when you say what's the mix between books, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Right.
Would anybody care, that's a good question, I could ask you this. Would anybody care if they couldn't, really care, if they couldn't go into a bookstore? You would? Okay, interesting. Well, that's good to know. We're not going anywhere soon, but
no doubt.
Yeah. But that is what we are investing so heavily in to be in a position when that becomes a challenge.
And that journey of venturing into new categories, new offerings, not to mention the digitization of the whole book-selling world, and now the broader world of merchandise. You became a creative engine of not only buying books and curating them, buying product and curating, but creating it.
Yes, we now have quite a good of our own.
And the product, as we're sharing backstage, is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And you've earned the right, I think, with customers to be seen as a go-to in so many lifestyle categories, and the curation is lovely. In fact, I think of it only as someone who loves and understands books in the way that you do, that could curate that kind of experience. And I think ultimately that's what customers want today.
We hope, and that will be interesting. Well, listen, it's really impressive. I would say, as one CEO to a CEO partner, it's extremely impressive to follow the journeys that you've had with these companies. I think the principles make enormous sense. You have even more powerful accolades on the back of the book, so that's quite wonderful.
It means a lot.
Yeah, and it's a huge achievement to get the book done. And I would say, as a CEO, this is a book well worth reading. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.